All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. We're going to explore a really fascinating concept: how going through massive, earth shattering emotional shifts can actually completely dismantle a self centered mindset. And more importantly, how that breakdown is exactly what forges a profound new spiritual foundation. We're tracking the journey from absolute despair to a radical psychological rearrangement. Specifically, we're looking at how these huge emotional displacements actually help a person find what the source texts refer to as a higher power or God by creating the space for that connection to happen. So you might be wondering, why is human willpower never enough to save us from our own destructive habits? I mean, for someone struggling with addiction, human reasoning and self-knowledge fail utterly against the phenomenon of craving. Once that cycle kicks in, willpower is practically non-existent. The person literally loses the power of choice. No matter how much they might desperately want to stop, or how clearly they remember the absolute misery of their last relapse, that intellectual understanding just isn't enough of a defense against the compulsion. And this hits on the core problem. Trying to run your life on self-will and intellectual pride is a total trap. The text uses this brilliant analogy of an actor who wants to run the entire show. They're trying to arrange the lights, the scenery, and all the other players on stage exactly to their own liking. Even when their motives are good, this relentless need to control everything is fundamentally flawed. Why? Because the rest of the world simply isn't going to cooperate with their script. So when the show inevitably goes off the rails, what happens? Well, the person usually just pushes harder. They exert more effort, they get angry, indignant, and totally swallowed up by self-pity. And naturally, these actions push the other players in their life to retaliate, which produces chaos instead of harmony. Ultimately, they end up completely isolated by their own ego, just driven by 100 different forms of fear. The sources make this brutally clear. Wishing to be moral or looking for philosophical comfort is totally useless here. The fundamental operating system of the individual is broken. They're actively blocked from finding any real peace or connection to a higher purpose because their own ego is taking up all the room. As the text puts it, human resources, marshaled by the will alone, simply fail utterly. To actually solve this seemingly incurable condition, a radical psychic change has to happen. Dr. Silkworth, who was observing this from a medical perspective, realized that these changes are actually phenomena. He called them huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. To overcome the physical allergy and that relentless mental obsession, the very ideas, emotions, and attitudes that once guided the person's life have to be violently uprooted. This emotional displacement completely dismantles that old self-centered way of thinking, and it's this exact dismantling that creates the necessary space for a new spiritual foundation. Think about it. You can't fill a cup that's already full. Those old controlling habits must be suddenly cast aside. By throwing out those old self-driven motives, the individual finally creates the room for a completely new set of conceptions to dominate them. This process of transformation is really a journey that starts with the pain of shattered self-reliance and ends with profound humility. First, the delusion that you can manage your own life has to be shattered. Then, that icy mountain of intellectual pride breaks down. This finally brings the individual to a state of foundational willingness, allowing them to pick up a simple kit of spiritual tools. This drastic shift forces a person to realize the utter futility of life as they had been living it. Now, we need to be clear, this emotional rearrangement is not some gentle little pivot. It's an internal earthquake. It's a vital spiritual experience that demands the total surrender of the ego. As the sources put it, it's simple, but not easy, because a heavy price has to be paid. To find a higher purpose, the old self can't just be adjusted or tweaked a little bit. It must be completely destroyed. This absolute destruction of self-centeredness is the mandatory price of admission for spiritual freedom. But here is the incredibly beautiful part about all of this. The source material emphasizes that building a relationship with a creator doesn't require some complex academic theology. It simply starts the moment a person is honest enough to ask themselves if they are even willing to believe in a higher power. That emotional earthquake we just talked about leaves the person with a foundational willingness. As soon as they are honest enough to try, they are well on their way. By clearing away all those old, exhausting, self-driven motives, the individual creates a massive open space for a completely new director to enter and miraculously manage the drama of their life. They accept a higher power as the principal. This is exactly how the displacement connects a person to God, by forcing them to finally resign from the management position they were terrible at anyway and just handing the reins over. You can almost feel the immediate relief that comes from this shift. The old actor was constantly self-seeking, driven by fear, and just totally exhausted from trying to force the world to cooperate with them. But the new agent, they actually trust their employer. They are established on a completely new footing, interested only in what they can contribute to life. That crushing anxiety of trying to run the whole show is replaced by the profound peace of simply playing their assigned role. So, what does making room for this new director look like in practice? Well, it requires active daily maintenance. It means abandoning yourself utterly to a higher power, asking to be relieved of the bondage of self, and turning your will over to his care. You have to clear away the wreckage of the past and make amends. You're actively keeping that space open, focusing entirely on being of maximum service and allowing the creator to work through you. Ultimately, these emotional displacements facilitate something truly spectacular. The text vibrantly describes it as being rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence that they hadn't even dreamed of. Through this deep internal transformation, the person doesn't just get sober. The old limits of their fear and self-will are completely shattered, and they're replaced by an expansive consciousness where sanity is finally and fully restored. In this new dimension, the profound aftermath of the spiritual experience touches literally every part of a person's life. Their entire attitude is revolutionized toward life and other people. Internally, the old chaos is replaced by total peace, serenity, and absolute confidence. And their actual capability shifts entirely, because the creator is now accomplishing what human power simply could not do on its own. By clearing away the old self, the impossible becomes reality. When we look back at the timeline of this journey, we can see how the dark quicksand of addiction actually acts as a crucial catalyst. It forces a person from that initial state of a hopeless condition right into the sudden emotional displacement that shatters their pride. Within a month, that foundational willingness to hand over control takes root, and years later, they are walking a broad highway hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. To wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder, and I want to thank you for joining me on this incredible exploration of the human spirit. Ask yourself, what old, self-centered ideas might you need to displace to find your own sense of peace or higher purpose? Because, as we've seen, true freedom often requires dismantling the very ego we fight so hard to protect. Definitely keep that in mind the next time you find yourself trying to run the whole show.